Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 2 hours of horror stories as per usual. We'll be starting things off with a tale of a fire watchtower, and of course, as always, we have much more coming right after that. I hope you all enjoy tonight's lineup. I think this is an especially good one. If you do enjoy, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's see if we can reach 1,500 likes on this one. I know that's a little bit ambitious, but I think if everybody took a quick second, we could definitely do it. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as I post content just like this all the time. Thank you all for the ongoing support. The channel is still growing extremely well, and I appreciate it very much. Anyway, sit back, grab a coffee, pack a bowl, whatever it is that you do to relax, and let's get into the stories. Enjoy, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I've been a fire watch lookout for about a year now. I spent most of my life alone in a small window-lined one-room shack atop a steel and wood-framed tower in the middle of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. My only companions are my collection of cheap novels, a laptop computer with infrequent and unreliable internet service, and the two-way radio I use to communicate with the few other nearby towers and ranger stations. Nearby is a bit of a misnomer though. Using my high-power binoculars, I can just barely make out Tower 12 on a clear day, situated several miles to my west. Tower 15, the next nearest to my location, only appears as a glint of sunlight to my east, when the sun catches it just right. I've been told the Parks Department intends to put up some additional towers in this area as soon as it gets the necessary funding, which is probably no time soon. That's fine with me though. I like the solitude. It helps quiet my mind, keeps the memories at bay, mostly. I occupy most of my days either with simple maintenance in and around the tower, or else scanning the dense sea of trees all around me for any signs of trouble. It's been a dry year, so the threat of fire is a constant one. This particular afternoon, I was clearing some brush from around the base of the tower that had begun to encroach on the fire road that led from my tower back to the main ranger station, 20 miles away. Even with the heavy suspension of the government-issued Jeep parked nearby, that was a harsh ride in the best of times. I had just finished dragging some brush cuttings off into the tree line when the radio clipped on my belt squawked. "Tower 9, this is Tower 12. Copy." It was Billy Johnson, my supervisor. A nice enough guy, I suppose. Tended to leave me alone most of the time. I straightened up and stretched my back, wiping the sweat out of my eyes with my forearm, and keyed the microphone attached at my shoulder. "Go for Tower 9, I replied as I replaced the shears and bow saw at the small storage shed near the base of the stairs. "John, do you have eyes on a bit of smoke north of your position?" "Stand up, Billy," I said, snatching up my water bottle and jogging up the metal staircase that wound its way around my tower. I didn't bother locking the 8-foot chain-link fence that surrounded my little compound. Chances were that I'd be back down here soon enough. Reaching the top, I stepped through the trapdoor and onto the walkway that surrounded the cabin, closing it behind me. It was habit at this point. The last thing I needed was to take an errant step and tumble down through the open trapdoor. I'd probably end up breaking my neck. As I passed by, I reached into the open door of the shack and grabbed the binoculars hanging on a nearby hook, rounding the railed corner of the walkway and turning my attention to the dark green blanket of trees stretching out before me. I saw the smoke almost immediately. A thin trickle of wispy white haze rose lazily above the canopy some distance off. Probably just some campers, I figured. Though there weren't any approved campsites in that area, We always had more than a few folks every season who decided that camping off-trail in the deep bush sounded like a hoot. Most of them come back just fine, oblivious to the danger that this wilderness presents to anyone not adequately prepared for its risks. Some of them have to be brought out by search and rescue. Some of them just don't come back. A member of the Rangers, or maybe even a random hiker, will occasionally trip across the deserted remains of a campsite and report it in. Those are the spooky ones, the ones where the people have just vanished and left behind a perfectly set up campsite. No explanation, no clues, just a deserted clearing, often with perfectly intact tents and personal effects. But there are bears and mountain lions, along with a handful of lesser predators that roam these forests, and sometimes they get hungry enough to stalk and even kill humans. And that doesn't even take into consideration the much more likely probability that folks step out of their tents at night to take a piss in the woods, and very quickly get lost and can't find their way back to their camp. Most humans aren't suited to survival in the wilderness, unfortunately. My radio squawked again. "Tower 9, what's the word?" "Yeah, I see it, Billy," I said. "Looks to be a couple miles due north of my tower." "What's your plan?" he asked, and I knew what he was asking. Keep an eye on it and hope for the best, or take a trip over and investigate. After a brief moment's pause, I sighed with resignation. It's probably just a campfire, but I guess I'd better head on over and take a look, just to be sure. I didn't relish the thought of a trek into that area of wilderness, to be honest. It was the only area I hadn't explored during my time here. There weren't many trails headed in that direction, and the ones that did were badly overgrown and too narrow for the Jeep. A couple miles hike might not seem like a lot, but when you're out here, alone, the dense trees seem to stretch on forever. 2 miles can seem like 100. "Roger that, John," Billy replied. "Take your pack and your rifle and check in periodically." "Will do. Tower 9 out," I said, replacing the binoculars to their hook and shouldering the red canvas backpack waiting dutifully in the corner chair. I grabbed the rifle from its rack over the doorframe, checked to make sure it was loaded, and headed out. As I locked the gate behind me, I threw my pack into the back of the Jeep and set the rifle beside it. The Jeep wouldn't get me too far before the brush made the trail impassable, but if it saved me even a half-mile of hiking, it was well worth it. The sun was still high in the sky. I had plenty of time to get there and back before dusk as long as I didn't dawdle. I started the engine and put the Jeep into gear, turning the wheels towards the unmaintained trail to my right. After only a few moments, the trees and canopy obscured any trace of the watchtower behind me. I was actually able to push the Jeep farther than I had expected. A pleasant surprise. I was probably a mile along the trail before it shit the bed, and a massive pine lay across the path, much too large to go over. The dense underbrush around me precluded the possibility of going around, and I immediately lamented not bringing the chainsaw with me. Cutting it up and winching the pieces out of the way wouldn't have been too difficult, and would have saved me a ton of trouble. With a quiet curse, I stepped out of the Jeep and grabbed my gear from the back seat. I smiled to myself as a quote from a certain fictional adventure-seeking archaeologist suddenly came to mind. "We walk from here." Making sure to mark the location of the Jeep on my handheld GPS so I could find it again, I stepped over the thigh-high tree trunk and continued along the path. According to the estimate I had made before leaving, the trail I was walking seemed to head in the direction of the smoke, which was a blessing in my book. The less time I had to spend bushwhacking, the better. The trail continued to narrow as I expected, and before too long I was brushing branches and leaves with my shoulders as I walked. The trees, which had been alive with the chitterings and chirpings of animal life back at the tower, now seemed muted. The forest around me was growing denser, feeling oddly claustrophobic at times. I checked in with Billy a couple of times, advising him of my progress and promising to maintain periodic checks. He advised me that a weather relay had come in from the ranger station indicating an approaching storm that would likely reach us before nightfall. A quick check of my watch made me wince. I had already spent more time than I had predicted it would take to reach the suspected campsite. Maybe it was best to turn around and head back. The last thing I wanted was to get caught out here overnight with minimal supplies and in a rainstorm. I wasn't worried, but it sure wouldn't make for a comfortable overnight. If I had been farther from my destination, I probably would have turned back right then. I wish I had. Within another 20 minutes, however, I smelled the faint scent of a wood fire. Not strong, but it was there. I was even more certain of what I would find when I reached them. When I stepped out of the now almost non-existent trail and found myself in a sparsely treed area, amidst a dozen or so wooden shacks, I halted in surprise. I had reached the base of a hilly rise, covered in heavy forestry, and these old, forgotten cabins looked like they had been some sort of small settlement, perhaps an old logging camp. I thought to myself. I didn't know this place even existed, and made a mental note to research it when I got back to my tower. I keyed the microphone. "Tower 12, this is John, do you copy?" When Billy replied, his voice was staticky and distant. "Hey John, Tower 12, what's your status?" I frowned and looked around at the towering trees all around me. I suppose I was asking more out of the portable radio than was reasonable. I was lucky I still had any signal at all, to be honest. "I found what looks like an old logging or trapping camp," I said, meandering along the decaying and derelict cabins. Most of them had decayed to the point of collapse, and there weren't any with intact roofs. "The campfire has to be nearby. I'm going to take a look around a bit more." There was an odd pause before Billy spoke again. "What's your current location, John?" I glanced at my handheld GPS and relayed my position to him. Another pause. "John, I think you should probably just turn around and come back. You don't have too many more hours of daylight left, and that storm looks to be getting worse." Something in his voice sounded off, but I couldn't quite place it. Nervous, maybe. I don't think I can blame him, though. My safety was his responsibility, and the prospect of one of his lookouts being caught out in the storm overnight probably didn't sit well with him. Coincidentally, it didn't sit well with me either. I thought with a smile. "You may be right, Billy," I replied, turning around and letting my eyes take in the entirety of the area. "I think I'll just head..." I stopped as my eyes caught sight of the bright yellow nylon tent just beyond the last of the structures. "Repeat your last," said Billy. "I didn't get that." "Stand by, Tower 12. I said absently, making my way to what I now realized was a small cluster of 3 modern tents, situated around a central fire ring. The fire had been extinguished, but the embers still smoldered slowly, and the source of the smoke. I looked around for the campers, but didn't see or hear anyone. Sleeping bags and electric lanterns were still on in the tents, though I couldn't find any backpacks or supplies. "Hello?" I called out, turning in a circle and trying to pick out any signs or sounds of human life. "I'm with the Forest Service. Is anyone there?" Nothing but the muted echo of my own voice. I was about to just dump some dirt on the remaining embers of the campfire and call it a day when I noticed the narrow footpath heading towards the slope. I could see clearly the recent footprints in the soft dirt, heading away from the camp. I keyed the microphone at my shoulder again. Tower 12, this is John. I found the source of the smoke. It's a campfire, all right. Nothing to be concerned about. Billy answered almost immediately. Roger that, John. Head back home. I paused a moment, curiosity pulling me towards the footpath. I'll be heading back shortly, Billy. I just want to check something out first. I wouldn't screw around out there, John. Billy replied, an edge to his voice. Better head back now so you can beat the storm. His last sentence didn't exactly sound like a suggestion. Something had him rattled. I hesitated before I answered. Acknowledged, I said, knowing full well that I was going to check out the path a bit before heading back. Still, I didn't feel like arguing with my supervisor about something so silly. Just a quick walk up the path, and then I'd be on my way. This path was even less established than the one I'd been on when I discovered the camp, but I could clearly see the prints of the campers in the soft dirt as I went. Before long, I emerged into a small clearing, eyes widening with yet another unexpected discovery. The rough-hewn timber that framed the entryway was set into the near vertical slope of the hill face before me. It created a dark tunnel entrance that had been sealed off with a heavy iron gate many years before, likely by the Park Service to keep inquisitive hikers from falling to their deaths in an old abandoned mine shaft. So, it had been a mining camp, not a logging camp. Huh. I didn't know there were any mines anywhere near here. Hell, I'm not sure what they would have been mining for. Coal, maybe. Gold? Did they even have gold mines in Tennessee? Who knows? Certainly not me, clearly. Regardless, now that gate stood wide open on its hinges, the remains of a rusted chain and antique padlock laying in the dirt nearby. Hell, now I couldn't just turn around and leave. Not if these campers had decided it would be fun to explore a closed and restricted mine entrance. Tower 12, this is John. Do you read? Billy probably wouldn't be happy that I had continued my exploration after he told me to head back, but there was nothing to do about it now. I wasn't equipped or trained for any sort of cave exploration or rescue. The Rangers had very specialized teams for that sort of thing, but I could at least poke my head inside and see if I could hear the campers, or at least confirm that they actually went inside. No answer from the radio. I tried again with the same results. Nothing. I tried a different approach. Tower 15, this is John from Tower 12, do you copy? I said into the radio. I figured I might be able to at least get Nathan's attention if I was out of range of Tower 12. There was a burst of static that sounded like it might have contained the hint of a human voice, but it was too distorted and distant to make anything out. There was only a moment of indecision before I made up my mind. I knew it was reckless to go into the mine, especially when my supervisor was under the belief that I was currently on my way back to my tower. But I just had this nagging intuition that something might be wrong with this whole situation. Maybe someone was hurt and in need of help. I couldn't just leave them there, knowing that I might be their only chance of rescue. In retrospect, I should have turned back and called it into the ranger station. They could have mobilized the S&R teams that specialized in cave rescues. I should have, but I didn't. I pulled my powerful LED flashlight from my pack, turned it on, and headed into the pitch-black darkness of the mine entrance. The walls and floor had been smoothly carved many years ago, which made my footing uneventful. And the tunnel itself was mostly a straight shot. Several times during the first few minutes, I turned back to watch the bright square of daylight at the entrance gradually shrink to a pinpoint of light. By the time I had taken the first dog-leg turn of the tunnel, I was in complete darkness. It was a very strange feeling, oppressive almost. At one point I turned off my flashlight experimentally, but after only a few seconds, I quickly flicked it back on. In that time, my heart had been pounding in my chest and some primal fear had begun growing inside of me. I took a moment to calm myself. The darkness was absolute. It was almost as if you could feel it pressing in on you. My footsteps seemed much louder than they should have on the dirt floor, and the air was beginning to grow cold and damp the farther I went. After another 100 feet or so, the smoothly carved tunnel ended abruptly in a wall of rubble. I couldn't tell if it was a cave-in at some point, or if this was simply where the miners stopped digging and hadn't bothered to remove the debris. But either way, it certainly appeared to be the end of the line. And then I saw it. I almost missed it because of the way the light and shadows played over the head-sized rock strewn before me. But when I looked closer, I realized I was looking at a ragged hole in the wall. It was only 5 feet across or so, and definitely didn't look like the deliberate formation of the tunnel I was standing in now. It almost looked like the miners had broken into a natural void of some sort. Interesting, but there was no way in hell I was going in there. I was definitely not trained or outfitted for any sort of spelunking trip, but it didn't seem the sort of thing suited to the learn-as-you-go method. Just as I was turning back to make my way out of the mine, I heard the distant sound of voices echoing from the opening in the stone wall. The sound was faint, and may have just been my imagination, but I didn't think so. "Hello?" I called, pressing my face into the black abyss of the hole. "Can you hear me? I'm with the Park Service. I'm here to help you." Nothing. The air from beyond the breach was cold and smelled stale. Old. Wrong. I felt as if I didn't belong here. None of us did. There was a long moment of unbroken silence, and then I heard a voice again, closer this time. "Did you hear that?" It said, presumably to a companion. It sounded like a young woman. Nervous. Uncertain. "Hello? Is someone in there?" That settled it for me. I carefully crawled through the opening and into the space beyond. Shining my light around, I found myself in a small natural chamber, maybe 30 feet across and with an uneven ceiling of jagged rock that barely cleared my head. The first thing that caught my attention was the cracked lantern laying on the ground. It looked old. Very old. Maybe 100 years or more. A thick layer of grime and age covered its soot-blackened tin surface, and the glass was thick and uneven. Beside the askew lantern was a small, leather-bound book partially buried in the dirt and dust, with a moldering leather strap securing it closed. It looked like a journal, and without a thought, I tucked it into my backpack, raising my light back up to scan around the room. "Hello?" I called again. I couldn't hear the voices anymore, but the narrow beam of my flashlight illuminated another tunnel in the far corner of this room, mired in darkness. "Can you hear me?" Once again, I got that feeling that something wasn't right. Then the voice came again, closer this time. "Did you hear that? Hello? Is someone in there?" she asked, her voice trembling with apprehension. I hesitated, frowning. Something didn't seem right about the voice, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Before I could summon my words to respond, another voice called out. This time it was clearly the voice of a young man. "We can hear you moving around in there. Please help us. We're lost and our friend is hurt." Hear me moving around in there? I was shouting to them. I sure as hell wasn't trying to hide. Can they not hear me for some reason? I stepped forward to the secondary tunnel and raised my voice again. "I'm with the Forest Service. Can you follow my voice?" It was then when I reached out to steady myself against the wall of the tunnel entrance that my hand met something wet and I recoiled in disgust. thinking I had just grabbed a handful of some subterranean slime. When I shone my light on it, however, it became very clear the reality was far worse. Blood. I stepped back, trying to keep the panic that was fighting to take control of my rationality at bay. I needed to keep a level head now. Panning my light around, I saw an astonishing amount of blood painting the wall and floor in front of me. Something had definitely been hurt, and badly. With blood loss like this, I wasn't sure I'd be able to stabilize them long enough to get rescue in here. What the hell happened here? And why did the hikers continue into the cave after one of them was injured this badly? Unless they lost their light and got turned around, there was no way for them to get lost. There hadn't been any branches to this tunnel since I first entered. All they had to do was turn around and walk until they saw daylight. The man's voice called again, colored with the unmistakable tinge of fear. "What is that? Hurry up, Becky. Take my hand." He seemed to be getting closer, at least. If I could guide them to my voice, maybe I could get them out of here. Get to higher ground, and radio for a rescue evac. They had a helicopter permanently stationed at the main ranger station. It could be here in 20 minutes if I was able to reach them. The woman's voice came again, and this time I froze. "Did you hear that? Hello? Is someone in there?" All at once it hit me, and the indescribable unease I had been mostly successful in repressing now fought back with renewed vigor. I realized that moment what I had missed previously. The woman had repeated herself twice more now. No change in her reflection. No variation in emotion or urgency. It was exactly the same down to the syllable. It was like I was listening to a recording. "What is that?" repeated the male voice, now even closer. "Hurry up, Becky. Take my hand." Below the words, I thought I could hear the stealthy sliding of something soft over rocks. It seemed like it wasn't too far beyond the tunnel entrance now, but I wasn't going to wait for it. I didn't think that what I'd see emerge from the darkness would be a couple of college kids who'd had a rough time of it during a weekend camping trip. Now allowing my panic to run free, I turned and threw myself through the cave breach and landed roughly on the flat stone floor of the mine shaft beyond, skinning my hands to hell and banging my knee on a rock. Scrambling to my feet with a hiss of pain, I ran as fast as I could, not realizing until I finally burst into the waning light of the late afternoon light that I had lost my rifle somewhere in that cave. It was darker than it was when I first entered the mine, and a quick glance at the sky showed the angry black thunderheads that had moved in as promised, much faster than I had expected. I quickly swung the iron gate closed and screeching hinges and looped the chain between the bars as tightly as I could, securing it rather lamely with the hasp of the broken padlock. I stood there a long moment, bent over and hands on knees as I tried to catch my breath outside of the mine entrance. When I felt the first drops of the coming storm on the back of my neck, I straightened and looked through the bars of the gate into the ominous darkness beyond, realizing how ridiculous my barricade really was. It wouldn't do much good if something tried to get out, but at least it made me feel a little better, until I heard the voice echoing from the mine shaft getting closer. It was unmistakable, uncanny. "Hello? Can you hear me? I'm with the Park Service. I'm here to help you." It's been almost 2 weeks since the incident. 10 days and 6 hours to be exact. All I can do is count the time. Someone knows I don't belong, and I know they're waiting for me to slip up on some small detail. I had just gotten out of the shower when a rush of confusion hit me. It was like I hit my head on the corner of a counter. But I was still conscious, and there was no pain. I felt different. I called my girlfriend, Angie, to let her know how terrified I was about what just happened, and she didn't seem too concerned. She was busy at work, so I figured she was preoccupied and couldn't focus straight. No big deal. She was able to calm me down enough to hang up and go about the night. I couldn't remember much. I didn't remember what happened that day, or even the week before. It's all still a blur. I decided to leave it be until the next day. Angie was asleep when I woke up, so I figured I had some time to relax. Except she looked different. Not a haircut, no makeup, but not how I knew her. Her dirty blonde hair now had less blonde in it. Her smile didn't shine like before. I knew she was different when she woke up. Her eyes were darker. From a shade of green to brown, and above all else, she had this unsettling mood. Not wanting to bother her, I went to my parents to pick up some mail. Mom wasn't home, but Dad was. Cheery as always, he hugged me when I walked in. And he was different. Slightly taller, slimmer build, and deeper voiced. Hey, he's been working out lately and it seems to have paid off. We talked for a bit before Mom walked in, and when she saw me, I watched her eyes grow wide as she shuddered through her sentence. She knew. I was terrified. I didn't bring up the incident, and after her initial shock, Mom carried on. I could immediately tell her differences. She was shorter, her voice lighter, and her hair was a light brown compared to her almost black hair from before. She had this unsettling stare towards me that no one else noticed. She knew that. She couldn't tell anyone. My dad and brother were thankfully oblivious to the heavy air that had settled into the house. After the uncomfortable conversation, Angie texted me and asked if I wanted to go to her parents for dinner. I shot a quick sure text back before saying goodbye to my parents and quickly leaving. Mom stared at me from the kitchen window as I pulled away. When I got home, Angie was watching TV and asked how I was feeling. If I would have been honest and told her, I probably would have been involuntarily submitted to a mental hospital. Who would believe anything I saw? If I told them. I told her I was feeling better, though I still couldn't remember much. I brushed it off, hoping she wouldn't push it too much, and she didn't. When we got to her parents' house, they opened the door and welcomed us. Her parents had changed exactly opposite of mine. Her dad was shorter, had put on a little weight, and lighter voice. Her mom was taller, voice deeper, and darker hair. After going inside, I felt so out of place. Her family went on about their day while I sat there visibly uncomfortable. Angie's dad asked if I was alright, and I told him I was sore from work. The subject was dropped as we continued on with the night. When we arrived back home, Angie went to shower as I sat down to really examine our apartment. Every piece of furniture, wall objects, and even the flooring had shifted slightly. It was here I finally realized it could be an effect from me hitting my head on something at work. The weird thing is, I hadn't hit my head on anything in months. After Angie got out, I hopped in, hoping to reverse the horrible day. Once out of the shower, I felt better and ready to forget the delusion I've been in. I laid down to the first rest that lasted longer than 4 hours, only to wake and realize I was still in this nightmare. My mother keeps calling me, asking me to come over for impractical tasks. She seems to be getting more and more adamant that I go over there whenever she is there. I agreed to go over the next day after work, just to stop the questions. I got to my parents' house and my mom was the only one home. Nervously, I asked what she needed help with. She told me something was going on with her stove and asked if I could help move it out. But once we got to the kitchen, she sat down at the table and asked me to join her. I slowly walked over and took a seat. She asked something disturbing. "Who are you?" It took me by surprise. I didn't expect her to be so blunt with it. I paused for a moment before replying. What do you mean? Her eyes narrowed for a second before returning to normal with her reply of, "Just wondering." Her off-centered smile sent chills up my spine. We proceeded with pulling the stove out so she could retrieve whatever it was that she lost, and I went on my way home. Angie was in the living room watching TV and asked what my mom needed help with, so I told her. Of course, I didn't mention the weird conversation, but she knew I held back and didn't push any further. Everything continued on as normal before bed, and once we were laying next to each other, I caught Angie staring hard at me. Blank expression, no smile, almost like she was looking right through me. I don't know if I'll last much longer here, and Angie is starting to get suspicious of me too. I work in a seasonal Halloween store. You probably know the one I'm talking about. We typically pop up in the plazas or mall fronts that are run down in your small town. We show up for about 2 months and then are gone. It's not a bad job. I'm able to work around my school schedule, and as a Halloween fanatic, it's pretty neat. I've done this enough where I've been able to become the key holder / shift lead. We get all kinds of customers. Small kids looking for costumes, adults looking for party decorations, dads going all out to make their houses the spookiest spot on the block, etc. I've done this a couple of seasons now. I was never surprised until lately. It started as a normal day. I was fronting all of the decorations and putting back the costumes that people haphazardly put in the wrong place. I was scarfing down a frozen burrito down on my lunch break when I saw him come in. This dude, he had to have been about 6'6". He was wearing an orange jumpsuit and had on a mask. This mask was very elaborate. It was pale gray / blue. The eyes were hollow and blacked out, so mesh hiding his eyes. The lips were stitched. So this isn't out of the ordinary. People do this very often. They dress up, come in a shop, and try to get a reaction out of some kids or record TikToks. "Get a load of this guy," I told Penelope. It was just me and her closing the store. We had one of those relationships where we weren't a couple, but everyone wondered why, and I think we wondered why too. "Yeah, that guy sure is scary. His mask is a winner. I've never seen it online or in any other store." The man casually browsed some of our decorations and I let him be. He came for attention. I wasn't going to validate him. Not until he walked through some of our displays where we have the animatronics, a vibrating floor, and a fog machine. It's really just a fun walkthrough for kids to get a quick spook in. Well, a small boy was walking through already nervous, and this man jumped into the path and let out a mighty laugh. The boy screamed and ran to his mother, leaving behind a puddle that I'd have to clean. I went to confront the man and ask him to leave, but before I could, the child's mother came up to me and gave me an earful. I apologized even though I had done nothing wrong, gave the kid a costume, and sent them out. Suddenly the man was gone. I walked back to the register and put on some campy horror movie that sits at the TV by the register. I started talking to Penelope about classes I was taking, and was going to invite her on a date. 2 ladies walked in that I happened to recognize from around college. They went to the sexy costume aisles, and grabbed about 3 or 4 costumes apiece. Penelope guided them to the private changing rooms that we keep available. She came back and had a smirk on her face. Sexy cats, Playboy bunnies, nurses, and poison ivy. How original. We both let out a chuckle and I had built the courage. "Hey, when we get out of here, do you want to catch one of those midnight showings at the drive-in? I can swing by the house and grab some snacks and set the truck up for optimal viewing." She bit her lip and looked at the ground, then at me. She bust out laughing and punched me in the shoulder. "Hell yeah, I'll go on a date with you," she said. I felt on top of the world. She went to help a horror dad look at the yard decorations while I was having my celebration internally. I went to put in a new CD in the store PA when we heard a woman screaming. Penelope and I took off as fast as we could towards the changing rooms. The tall masked man had ripped open one of the changing room doors and threw a gallon of fake blood all over one of those girls while she was changing costumes. Penelope quickly grabbed one of the ponchos we sell and covered the crying girl. Her friend heard the commotion and came out of her stall, helping Penelope lead the girl to the staff bathroom to get the fake blood out of her eyes and attempt to clean her up. I was livid. I quickly raced to the man and yelled, "Hey pervert, I don't know what game this is, but you have to leave now." Another customer chirped in, "Hey, step away from him. The police are on the way." The man turned and stormed out of the entrance doors. Some minutes later, local PD came out. I talked with them while Penelope gathered the woman's street clothes. I told the officers all I knew, and I pulled up what security camera footage I could. But all of it really was useless. I mean, the dude was in a costume. I have no true description of him other than him being tall. We did see that he pulled off in an old Ford Festiva, but we couldn't make out the plates. He had parked far away enough that the footage was grainy. The officers spoke with the two women and went on their way. I gathered up the mop to clean the mess that the man had made. Closing time came around and Penelope told me she was heading out. It was my job to do closing operations, such as security codes and counting the tills at the end. So I told her I'd be leaving in an hour and would swing by the house to get the truck ready and pick her up. She gave me a small kiss on the cheek and left. I quickly went to the office and counted the money and locked the office on my way out. Heading to the front door, I noticed another spill. Great. More punk kids and fake blood. Back near the changing rooms again. I figured some kid made off to play while some parent wasn't paying attention. I opened the curtain and my stomach dropped. Penelope lay there in a pool of blood, mouth bubbling and tears falling from her face. She managed to look past me before she grew silent. I quickly called EMT and told them that there was a murder. First responders would be on the way, but it would take them at least 10 minutes. I felt two hands on my shoulder, and then I was flung into a display of pitchforks and sling blades. Looking up, my eyes met him, the man with the mask. He sat on me and put his hands around my throat. I could see his tongue licking the stitches while I was reaching for anything I could find. There was nothing in my reach and I put my hands on his face. The mask felt like real skin. I managed to put my thumbs closer to his eyes, and in a moment of pure instinct, I jammed my thumbs into his eyes. The mesh broke and I was able to get a pretty good hit there. However, it only lasted a second, but it was enough to clear my airway and swipe his ankle on my way out from under him. I took off to the front door to escape, only to find it locked. I banged on the door until my hand bled. I ran into one of our walkthroughs, hoping I could wait it out until maybe the cops could bust the door. I curled into a corner and held my breath. Minutes later, I could hear the man whistling and laughing as he checked in containers. He made his way into the encampment I had burrowed into and triggered some lights and fog. Doing so set off an animatronic witch. She began to rock back and forth and it exposed me. He saw me and pulled out his knife. He put his hands on me and I managed to knock the witch over as he pulled me out. She fell against him. She wasn't heavy, but it was just enough resistance I could run. At this point I saw the blue lights and police working on opening the door. They barely had it cracked and I bust out crying. They stormed in the area, but couldn't find the killer. EMT examined me and I was stable enough to go home. They checked in on Penelope, but it was too late. She had been gone the moment I was with her. Be safe this season and watch out for people in costumes. We can all agree that it's satisfying to pop a pimple, right? Don't get me wrong, it's absolutely disgusting, but something about a buildup of pressure under the skin being pushed forward and out of it is just the right kind of gross. It feels like cleaning your skin in a way. Like letting the pus come out of your pores is healthier than letting it sit there festering. I know for a fact that it isn't actually good for your skin, but it feels like it should be. It became part of my morning routine, poring over my own reflection looking for blemishes. I have a little mirror in my bathroom that shows a close-up, just for this purpose. I'm no Dr. Pimple Popper. I wasn't filming it or anything, just a routine that helped me feel like I was cleaning my skin thoroughly. A week ago, when I began my routine, I realized I had a particularly nasty whitehead along my jawline, just off-center from my chin. The head was small, but there was a larger base burgeoning just beneath the skin. Using the tool to apply pressure as well as my finger, I popped it. The pus was vicious and foul-smelling, and a shade closer to yellow than the usual off-white. I maneuvered the tool around my skin, trying to get all the clog from beneath it, but still found myself unable to get all of it with the tool alone. I honestly didn't think much of it. I wore a bandage to work in an attempt to hide the crater in my face and breathed a sigh of relief when I realized it was barely noticeable underneath my mask. The next day, upon beginning my routine, I realized two things. First, was that the pimple had thankfully scabbed over. I hadn't fully been able to get deeper enough to clear it of pus, but I had gotten enough out to be pleased with my own handiwork. It was nearly deflated, now just a sore with a small mound surrounding it rather than the mountainous blight from the day before. The second thing I noticed was that a similarly enormous whitehead was sitting just at the edge of my hairline, as big as if not overtaking the size of the one from the day before. Frustrated, I made quick work of it and put on yet another band-aid, audibly sighing when I realized this one wouldn't be covered by my mask. The liquid evacuated from my skin was just as rancid smelling as the day before, and I gagged as I realized it was leaking down my face from under the bandage. When I pulled the bandage away, I discovered that just as the day before, I had been unable to get all of the liquid out. It was too deeply embedded within my skin. The thick, chunky pus flowed down my forehead, and I cursed quietly. I used my metal pick to go deeper still into my skin, applying pressure until a red welt began to form and the dripping finally stopped. Here's where I may have messed up. When I got home from work that day, I took the band-aid off the now scabbed over wound from the day before, just to replace it. As I looked at the thin layer of skin over the crater, I realized it had flared up during the day, getting rounded and almost painful to the touch. It strained against my skin, making it a dark pink color around the white head of the pimple. Infected, I was sure. I had no idea how to handle it, but seeing it rounded again made me think that if I could get out the infected pus, I could make the pimple go away altogether. I applied pressure yet again from the metal instrument and my finger, and yet again it erupted. It was the same yellow, stinking mess as the last two times, and there was quite a bit more of it. But even as I released what seemed to be an absurd amount of secretion, I felt more beneath my skin. I steadied my resolve and dug as deep as I dared, wincing from pain as with a tiny squelch, a solidified ball of mass came from the spot on my chin. When released, it gave off a worse stench than when the previous whiteheads, almost as if the scent were concentrated. To my dismay, it stayed there resting on the wound rather than falling as I'd expected it to, and I quickly realized that it was stuck to a wispy trail of blood, holding it in the air. It was about the size of my pinky fingernail in total, but as I looked at the coagulated blood-covered ball, I reached up to take it off my face. Grasping it gently beneath my thumb and forefinger, I noticed the gut-wrenching squish that I felt, as if the thing were mostly liquid. After smudging some of the blood off, I realized with a start that while most of it was off-white, a speck of it was sickly yellow, reminiscent of a rotten egg yolk. It darkened in the center to a slit of black, and I tried to tell myself that there was no possible way for it to be an eye. As I tried to pull it off of my chin, the thin string of blood stayed attached, and after pulling it about an inch from my face, it pulled taut. I realized that I had mistaken a vein for a trail of blood. It hadn't hurt to pull the orb until the vein held, and even then the pain was not from a place I recognized. I had expected to feel it behind the wound, but I realized with a start that the pain I was feeling began near the top of my shoulder, a pressure I couldn't relieve. What can you do with something like that? I wouldn't be putting the thing that I'd decided was not an eyeball back into me, so I had to pull the vein. It was as simple as that. It was indescribably painful. The slow trail from inside my shoulder to my chin, the throat, I think was the worst part, as whatever was at the end of the vein dragged its sharp, hard edge beneath my skin. It didn't help that the blood and ever more disgusting pus dropped from the wound as I pulled, stirred by whatever I was bringing to the surface. Still, I pulled at the increasingly long red thread that kept the thing that couldn't possibly be an eyeball with a rotten pupil hanging off my face. When I finally got whatever was tethered inside of me to the wound where my pimple had been, I assumed that the worst of it was over. I assumed until I realized that whatever hard, sharp object had been in me must now come through the pinprick-sized hole in my face. I would like to say I was brave in the end, that I unemotionally pulled the last of it through, but if I were being honest, I screamed. I cried. I gave up over and over, despite knowing that each brief reprise from pain would only make it all the sharper when I tried again. Eventually I used my metal pimple tool to open the wound further and finally pressed the dark metal object through my skin. You'd think I would have noticed somewhere along the way when vein had become wire, but I was distracted by the pain I was in, and even looking at it, I couldn't see a single point where one bled into the other. It was absolutely seamless. Having the ordeal over with, I looked closer and saw small veins running throughout what I know had to be an eye, hidden deep within my skin. The color of the eye was not my own, and the slit pupil looked almost animal in nature. That wasn't what made me cry out in shock, though. The inhuman-looking eye wasn't what made me immediately flush the eye and vein and anchor all down the toilet, crying inconsolably as I prayed that it had all been a dream. What caused this reaction was the realization that even without a deep understanding of technology, I understood the black metal that had been inside of my own shoulder had to have been some kind of camera. This morning when I woke up, there were 4 more white heads straining against my jawline, and 2 more on my forehead. Each was larger than the last and looked ready to pop at any moment. I don't know yet if I'll have the strength to pop them, or what will develop if I don't. I don't know if each contains an eye, or if by some miracle they're regular pimples. All I know is that I can feel something underneath them, deep within my muscles. I can feel it growing within me, and I don't know if pulling out whatever is being grown can stop it. This happened a long time ago. I was many years younger then, and so many years less experienced. I was recruited for a job aboard a research submarine, exploring the waters around my hometown. Reports of strange aquatic animal behaviors had been surfacing all along the coast, and being familiar with the field of marine biology, I was all too willing to help investigate. I signed up for the job without hesitation, needing both the work experience and the money. I wasn't all too familiar with submarines, however. When I arrived at the beach, I was surprised to discover that the vessel would have a crew of only 2 other people. I ran up to the pill-shaped contraption, which was being loaded with all manner of strange equipment that I hadn't seen before. The 2 men hauling equipment into it were almost polar opposites in appearance. One had dark, clean-cut hair, a bulky build, and a hard look in his eye. He was wearing what looked to be a scuba suit. The other was short and lean, with a sandy, tousled mane of hair and a more jovial, optimistic look about him. As I stepped onto the dock, the blonde one stopped to greet me. He held out his hand and shook mine with a grin. "Pleased to meet you," he said in a friendly tone. "I'm Sam. I'm gonna be your captain for the next few days while we get this whole situation figured out. What's your name?" "Danny," I smiled back. I then reached out to shake the other man's hand. He didn't smile and curtly introduced himself as Robert. "You 2 can climb up into the sub and sit down in the back while I get her lowered down," said Sam. I took one last look at the ocean. It was a bright, clear day, and the sea was as calm and empty as ever. I mused to myself and wondered how anything unusual could be going on in those clear waters. I clambered in, closely followed by Robert, and then Sam a few minutes later, who latched the door behind him. It was much colder in the submarine, and being packed so close together with the cramped metal walls made me feel a bit claustrophobic. But I didn't have time to worry about any of that. Before I knew it, we were plunging into the water. The waves crashed against the front window as we hovered just above the surface. Outside the portholes, I could see the divide between the water and the sky. I thought to myself how different it would be, being submerged for so long, not being able to see the sky. And then it was gone, swallowed up by the waves. The engine started with a dull roar, and we sped into the blue depths. Everything started out normal enough, so normal in fact that I forgot all about our job. Fish darted by in shoals, then scattered as our vessel carved its path through the reef. I gazed out the windows to see crabs peeking out from behind rocks, eels slithering in and out of crevices, and even a shark that drifted by the craft. Sam's voice brought me out of my reverie. "You 2 seen anything strange yet?" "No," I replied hastily. "Just that shark," Robert said gruffly. I paused for a moment. The shark wasn't strange, right? I had seen many sharks in these waters. It wasn't out of the ordinary at all. But then I looked more closely at its receding form in front of us. Something did feel off about it, but I couldn't place my finger on what. It was eventually swallowed up by the sea fog, lost from sight. "Ah, I see," Sam said from the front of the sub. "I say we keep a tail on it, find out where it's heading." The sub sped up, but Sam couldn't seem to find the shark. Robert was staring out his window, so I turned to look out mine. "Stop the sub," he said suddenly. "Why?" came an inquiry from the front. "Because I've seen something," Robert said, a hint of exasperation in his voice. The craft slowed to a stop and Robert got up. "Are you going out there?" asked Sam. "Of course," Robert replied, already pulling on a scuba helmet. "Okay, just be careful. I've done this before," he snapped back. I didn't understand why Robert had to be so standoffish. His unnecessary arguing made me almost want to turn the sub around and head back to shore myself. Looking back now, I wish I had. Sam led Robert into the pressure chamber, which would flush out all the seawater and make sure the pressure's changes didn't kill Robert. I could hear them scuffling around in there. For some reason, my nerves were already shot, and every bump and bang sent me into a slight panic. The walls were staring at me coldly. They were so cold, it had been a long time now. 5 minutes, maybe 6. I jumped when the door finally opened. Sam stepped out, sealing the chamber behind Robert. I watched as the diver swam out of the sub and along the ocean floor. Sam and I were silent. Robert stopped suddenly, digging something out of the sand. He began to swim back, but then froze as if petrified. His flippers stopped moving, and he sank a few feet before he seemed to remember how to use them. When I saw what he was looking at, I gasped. It was a great white, a massive one too, but that wasn't the scariest thing. And then it hit me with what was so unsettling about the other shark. As this great white drifted right past the window, it didn't move a muscle. Its fins were completely still, its eyes glazed over and empty. Behind those glassy eyes, there was nothing but a husk. The creature continued to float eerily, following almost the same trajectory as the other shark we saw. I turned quickly to Sam. "Did you see that?" But he was staring out his own window. Through it, I could see a shoal of fish. They weren't swimming either. They were drifting lifelessly, perfectly in sync with each other. Sam turned back to me, a strange expression in his eyes. "I don't know what's going on here," he said, "but it's not like anything I've seen before." Just then, we were both startled by a pounding on the pressure chamber door. That must be Robert," said Sam, regaining his composure. He drained the chamber, then opened the door. A few drops of seawater still clung to the door frame. Robert stumbled into the room, prying off his helmet. He, too, had an expression that I hadn't seen before. If I hadn't met him, I might have mistaken it for fear. He collapsed onto the seat, and that was when I realized that he was holding something in his hands. "Nasty thing," he said, parting his fingers. "Like that other beast out there." I looked at the thing he was holding. It looked to be a silver surf perch, a common fish around here. On its side, though, there was a gaping wound. It looked to be a bite, but it was like no bite I had ever seen before. It was just a collection of vicious puncture marks going deep into the flesh. They oozed a disgusting green fluid. It bled out and was starting to drip all over Robert's gloved hands. Sam took a step back. "What on earth? Robert, what?" I was just as speechless. "Is that safe?" Sam followed up. "It should be," Robert replied, but he said it more to himself than to us. He shoved the lifeless fish into a small bag that rested next to his seat. Sam ran back to the front of the sub and started the engine. "We need to follow those fish," he announced. The engine flared to life and the sub accelerated towards the empty blue waters ahead. I glanced at Robert. He seemed disgruntled, almost worried. But Robert wouldn't be worried. Robert couldn't be worried. I shifted in my seat and turned to look out the window. Was that a shark in the distance? No, probably just a trick of the light. I noticed we were beginning to descend along with the seafloor. The inside of the sub was getting colder, so cold that I started to shiver. I put on a heavy coat that I had been advised to pack with me. Then I saw the most terrifying thing up till that point. It was definitely a shark. Not a trick of the light because it was so close. It almost glided past us, like a mindless zombie, and I could see it twitching ever so slightly. Along its side were 2 clear bite wounds, leaking a cloud of green ooze into the water. The shark kept going, and I could see that everyone was unnerved. That was when there were more. It started as just a few more, just a light sprinkling of fish. There were some eels, a turtle, a hammerhead, all moving exactly the same. "We should turn back," said Robert, making me jump again. I looked at him. Was it just the light, or did his expression seem less confident than before? Sam's voice sounded distant when I finally heard it. Turn back? Now? When we're finally getting somewhere? Then Robert stood up, bracing himself against the wall of the sub. "Sam, we have to go back." "Robert, please sit down. I don't see any good reason to turn back. These sea creatures are acting odd, sure, but they don't seem to have any interest in us." "You don't understand. We can't keep going. This is getting bad." I turned to look out the window, and my heart dropped a few feet. There were so many more. Too many more. I could see at least 5 sharks right outside the window, surrounded by dozens of fish. Behind that, I could make out several more ghostly forms in the sea fog. They drifted in and out of view, but something told me that was because of the sub, not their movements. They made no movements. Outside Robert's window, it was the same. In front of us, it was the same. I looked down, only to see that the sea floor had completely dropped away from view. Below us, there was only ghostly blue fog and somehow no aquatic creatures. It was like looking out of an airplane. Only it felt scarier because you couldn't see what was down there. It was so empty, and yet I took no comfort in that emptiness. Not like before. I heard Robert's voice again. "Please, this won't end well." He paused and sat down again. There's... Before he could finish, a massive shadow blocked out all the light from the surface. Suddenly only a dim glow from the hull illuminated the sub. The moment was over almost as quickly as it came, but the terror was not. An enormous whale came into view above us, and for its size, it could only have been a blue whale. I had never actually seen one before, and maybe it should have been exciting, but now it only felt wrong. The animal drifted just as lifelessly through the water as all the rest. It didn't move its fins, its tail, anything. I couldn't see its eyes, but I could imagine them, all cloudy and dead. I could make out a faint trail of green following it. I thought I couldn't get any more unsettled, more scared, more terrified. But then everything stopped. All the creatures, the sharks, the fish, even the whale, they all just froze. The temperature seemed to plummet. The sub kept going. We passed under the whale again, and we continued through what could only be described as an undersea graveyard. They had to be dead, I thought, but they were so still and entirely too coordinated. Hundreds upon hundreds of empty husks. Nothing more, and yet... Was that a scratching sound coming from below the sub? I was sure I heard something. There was dripping, too. That must have been from the pressure chamber. Sam mumbled a few words from the front. I looked at Robert, who had gone as white as a skeleton. He looked like he'd seen one, too. And then he jumped to his feet so forcefully that he rocked the entire sub. "Go up," he said, deadly serious, but with a slight hint of panic in his voice. "Sam, I said go up." He grabbed something that looked like a flare. "Robert, you need to calm down." "Sam, you need to go to the surface right now, or one way or another, you're gonna die." I don't know if I agreed with the way Robert put it, but I definitely agreed with the sentiment. Right now, my heart was clawing its way up my throat, and my arm hairs were standing straight up. That was definitely scratching. I thought about saying something. I hesitated. I froze up, and no words ever came out. Maybe if I had said something, it wouldn't have happened the way it did. Maybe. I don't know. Sam took a deep breath from the front seat. I felt the sub slowly pull to a dead stop. The rumbling of the engine gradually tapered away into the silence that permeated the air all around us. He stood, turning to face Robert. He took another breath. The seconds crawl by like hours when I think about it. He takes another breath. There is no more scratching. There is no more dripping. The silence grows and grows, becoming this menacing thing that Sam is about to dispel with his next words. And then he breathes one last time. Crash. The hull is gone. Sam is gone. Crash. We're thrown upward and my lungs fill with water. I think I'm still in the sub. Bang. Everything hurts. I think I hear the scratching. I think I see something. I don't know what it is. Crunch. I'm thrust backwards, but an arm grabs me and I stop moving. I can't hold my breath much longer. My lungs are bursting. I think we're going up. I bump my head on something. We stop. Something pulls down on my arm. I'm coughing. I can't breathe. I can breathe. I can. I took massive gulps, inhaling the salty air as if I had never tasted oxygen before. I opened my eyes after what felt like forever. The sunlight almost blinded me at first, but I was ecstatic to see it. I also felt dizzy, faint, exhausted, and terrified. And my chest hurt. My chest really hurt. But I felt safe. Somehow not being able to see what was under the water made it all go away. I looked to my side. Robert was there. Sam wasn't. But Robert was. It took me a moment to realize that he was crying. His face was soaked, but I could see fresh tears rolling down his cheeks. Robert, are you... My voice trailed off. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't know. Didn't know what? I asked. I didn't know. I left it at that. I didn't feel like talking right now. We started swimming away. Away was the only way to go now. Eventually we were too tired. We stopped. I saw the flare, still clutched tightly in his hand, and I asked him for it. He handed it over to me, listlessly, then turned away. It wasn't a big flare with smoke and fire. It was some sort of GPS device. I hoped that would help us, not hurt us. I pulled a little tab that activated it. Whatever happened now, help was coming soon. Robert had to keep me afloat after a while. I was cold and getting tired. Luckily, he could paddle for the both of us. Otherwise, I would have ended up dead. It only got colder and darker from there. The sun disappeared. I started to give up eventually. It was hard to breathe. I don't know how long it actually was. It felt like years, decades. I don't know how Robert kept going. Finally, there was a light in the sky. I smiled. I hoped Robert smiled too. I heard the blades of the helicopter draw closer and closer, and a ladder tumbled down from above. I had never been more relieved. After that, it was a blur. A lot happened. They took us into the helicopter. We spent a while being questioned, but they were nice. Robert just kept repeating that he was sorry. I think he was in shock. I told them to look for Sam, but they said they couldn't see him. We made it to land after a while. The people on the helicopter determined that we needed medical attention, so that was what we got. The hospital was bland and stale. All I remember is what they told me. Apparently, I had nitrogen bubbles in my blood, and I was gonna die. Something to do with the sudden pressure change. They fixed that though. Apparently I also had a heart attack. They fixed that too. I was surprised how much they fixed, and that I lived. I felt bad for Robert, though. He had a bad gash in his leg. It was bleeding that same green ooze, and the doctors couldn't figure out what it was. But they found that it contained harmful chemicals and determined that it had to be removed. Unfortunately, the poison had spread to most of Robert's legs, so he had to get it amputated. He really didn't deserve that. He saved my life. I made sure to thank him for it too. It was strange though, because when I did, he only shook his head sadly. I just couldn't understand that man. I don't know what came of our research. Whether Robert told them anything, I never found out. I kept it private. No one would have believed me. I don't even really know what I saw. I mean, after the sub was ripped in shreds, my memories are all tangled and fuzzy. Nothing really fits right, so I left it to fate. Eventually the reports died down, aside from a decrease in biodiversity. I don't think anything came of it. I've never taken a swim in those waters since, but that's just me being paranoid. The one thing that haunts me is the thought of Sam. They never found him. I wonder sometimes if he's still drifting down there. His face pale and gray, his eyes covered by the fog of death, not moving a muscle, but still being pulled towards some singular point out in the cold, dark, lonely abyss. Whatever is happening to me, it can't be real. Every day now feels like a waking nightmare. Each day that passes, it gets worse. I'm a nobody. I've always told myself and others that. For me, it was an excuse, an easy way out of things. If I tell myself and others that I am someone insignificant, there would be low to no expectations of me. Nobody will expect anything. And nobody should expect anything from an insignificant, unassuming nobody like me. Now I wish I hadn't been doing it so much. It happened very slowly, literally bit by bit. I came home to my hometown from university for my semester break. As I approached my family's home's picket fence, I was expecting warm barks of welcome, but no. Our family dog, the family dog that I took care of for 18 years of my life, was viciously barking and snapping at me. I tried to reach for the gate, but he came snarling and attempted to bite me. This was very unusual for a dog like him. I really couldn't enter the house until my father calmed him down, chained him up, and let me into the house. At this time, I thought it was just that the family dog was old, and it was the evening times when I came home. I figured he didn't recognize me. Things got worse when I got back to the university. Admittedly, I'm not the most famous or recognized person at the uni, but I couldn't help but notice how weirdly people are staring at me. Some looked confused, others looked genuinely terrified. I tried approaching the student council president, who happens to be in my circle. As I greeted him, a sense of unfamiliarity radiated through his eyes, and even though I did have a conversation with him, it turned out particularly strange. He kept making me repeat my name as if trying to remember it, and he seemed so uncomfortable while talking to me. As the days passed by, it became more ominous and uncomfortably uncanny. People I knew at the university would look at me with confusion as I tried to approach them. Even some of my professors, some of whom were my professors from the freshman year until now, would seem utterly confused when they see me in their class. At first I was in denial, looking for even the slightest of a logical excuse. I thought maybe people were pulling a prank on me, but this has got to be the most elaborate and grand prank I've ever experienced. How can every student in the university be part of this? And why me? As far as I am concerned, I'm not one to be taking this kind of treatment from everyone. I came home yesterday to the house that I've been coming home to for the last 22 years of my life. And instead of warm hugs and beaming smiles from both my father and my mother, I am met with confused eyes and smug frowns. The warmth of a home now replaced with uneasiness and confusion. I unknowingly tried to enter the home, only to be driven away by my father. I'm as confused as everybody. Now it feels like I'm a stranger not only to actual strangers, but to the friends and family that I have known all my life. I tried confiding in my closest friends only to be avoided by them and met with the usual, "I don't know you." I tried coming back to my home multiple times over, and again I was chased away, even had the cops called on me. It's only getting worse. Now everyone looks at me with baffled expressions and suspicious eyes, almost as if I didn't seem human to them. And I can't seem to remember my own name. What's happening? When I try to say my name, I'm met with a mental block, like my brain can't seem to look for the right name to say, even if I try my hardest to remember. Please, to whoever is reading this, please tell me to remember. For lack of a better word, I have an imaginary friend, a common housefly that lives in my peripheral vision always. If I am looking at a blank white wall, the fly will stand perched in the upper right-hand corner, just out of my reach. If I am looking at my phone, the fly will flit across the screen, always nearly avoiding the swipes of my finger. It's like having one of those eye floaters that re-enters your field of vision no matter where you look. My mental health has suffered. It's not lost on me that flies are associated with decay and disease. Sometimes I feel like a corpse. The fly is a circling vulture, waiting for my body to wither away so it can consume me. Sometimes I feel diseased. The fly, an embodiment of some malady, rotting away my insides. Something undiagnosed and killing me slowly. It has always been this way, for as long as I can remember. I remember waiting for the bus as a kid. We were sitting nervously on the bench, me and my neighborhood crush. We somehow stuttered our way into both saying we wanted to kiss each other. So, hand in sweaty hand, we leaned in. At this moment, I realized I needed to aim. The moment I looked down at her lips, the fly crawled out of her mouth. I ran away. She didn't seem too interested in me after that. Of course, I've tried to kill it. I read a thread somewhere on the internet. You have to clap your hands above where the fly is, so that when it takes off, it flies into the impact. I've tried fly traps. One day I cracked and went to a reptile show. I remember feeling the pinch of the chameleon's feet on my skin as I marveled at its 360-degree eyes. It never once perceived the winged passenger I wanted it to catch. Nothing works. The fly has plagued me for years and years. I do an okay job at ignoring it when I can. It's a matter of basic survival. If I cared when a fly landed on my food, I'd starve. Sometimes I mistake my illusion for the real thing. I thought nothing of that fly that landed on Mike Pence's face during the 2020 vice presidential debate. Just my hyperactive imagination, once again, until someone else in the room shouted, "Do you see that fly?" It stands perched on the bezel of my computer screen as I type now. If I were to reach for it, it would fly away at the last second. If I were to capture it, it would escape the moment I looked away. So I started therapy, and it didn't take long before I made a discovery. My therapist put me into a suggestive state, some kind of light hypnosis. She asked me to remember everything I could about flies. From the depths of my subconscious, a repressed memory emerged. A classmate told me that you could put a fly on a string and it would zoom around like it was on a leash. So I caught a housefly under a glass, slipped a piece of cardboard underneath it, then put the fly in the freezer. When I took it out, the fly was disabled, only able to watch paralyzed as I mangled its tiny body with my clumsy child hands. My father caught me. He sat me down and explained how, even though this was a bug with no discernible emotions to the human eye, it still likely felt pain. It is not immoral to kill bugs, but it is immoral to torture. The measure of a man is how he treats those who can do nothing for him. My father's glasses flashed, reflecting my shame. It was the first time he'd looked at me in weeks. The fly then crawled out from my father's nose onto the peak of his upper lip. From that day on, I've been haunted by a damn bug. A bug that represents my father's shame in me. My shame in myself for not measuring up to a man when I was only a child. How is that fair? While the fly remains, other creatures I've killed have come and gone. I remember catching a fish as a teen and being taught how to kill and scale it myself. It gave me nightmares for weeks, the kind of nightmares where you wake up, but you are still in the dream. I threw off the covers to see a gored fish, floundering bloody and hopeless, tangled in the sheets at my legs. Another time, my buddies and I spent a summer afternoon burning ants alive using a magnifying glass and the sun. 4 weeks afterwards, when I spit out my toothpaste, little incinerated ant bodies emerged from the froth in the sink. I don't eat most meat for this reason. I've found that I don't look directly at veal, for example. It rises and falls like it's breathing. Believe me, therapy has helped. Therapy brought the genesis of my problems to light, but if identifying the problem is step 1, and you don't know how to perform step 2, you're kind of out of luck. I don't think my therapist really believes me anyway, so I drink. Or at least, that's what I've done since I was 13. Dad sure seemed to pay more attention to me once that started at least, and I drink. Is there such a thing as justifiable alcoholism? The fly seems to at least perch itself further away from me once I'm sufficiently blasted. It's been this way for a long time. All I remember is that I was driving to my father's house. I was going to do it. I was going to accuse him of not loving me, show him what a barely raised child looks like, tell him how badly messed up I was. I remember getting behind the wheel. All I feel now is sterile air. The smell of my own fear, the before the storm ache in my head that will multiply into a full-blown hangover. I open my eyes, squinting in the light. There's a tube sticking out of my arm. I'm in a hospital room. I've been drinking for a while. This isn't the first time I've woken up somewhere I don't remember going to sleep. I can't really move my neck. I ache and hurt all over. Feels like road rash underneath these bandages. I crashed? The nurse comes into the room. She's asking me questions and refusing to answer mine. She leaves without revealing anything. She left a breakfast tray. I opened the heat lid. What should have been breakfast was a plate of 1,000 writhing maggots. I throw the tray across the room in disgust. It lands at the feet of a family. A husband and wife sitting with their 2 children between them. Why am I handcuffed to the bed? I demand answers from the family, but they don't reply. Their eyes are vacant and don't leave mine. I turn away, calling for the nurse through the closed door. The family slowly stands up, and like an eye floater, re-enters my field of vision once again. I've had fish tanks for years. It's so peaceful to watch the various aquatic creatures swimming around living their lives. It can be a lot of work and money at times, but for me, It's worth the joy it brings me. Last month, some disease or parasite wiped out everything in my tank, even the shrimp and snails. It was sad, but it happens. From tragedy, a new beginning. I got to pick out all new fish, shrimp, and snails. I never named the inhabitants of my fish tanks. It's not a rule, I've just never done it. I don't know why I named this one particular fish, but I think bringing him home was a big mistake. Satan was a bright red fish with yellow flecks and black stripes. I thought this was a clever name for a fish with these colors. The tips of his tail looked like they could puncture your skin if you touched them. He had an extra set of fins on the upper part of his sides that kind of looked like wings. There were no other fish in the store like him. Strange thing was, the store owner hadn't known where he came from. He sold him to me for $5. I scoured the internet, trying to figure out what kind of fish Satan was, but had no luck. Maybe it was a coincidence, but on the drive home from the pet store, I very narrowly avoided 3 car accidents and tripped and fell in the driveway. I almost dropped Satan's bag. I kind of wish I had. I put Satan and all of his new, nameless friends in my tank. I was very happy with my choices, especially Satan. Although the other fish were bigger than Satan, they all seemed to be scared of him. This is very odd when it comes to fish hierarchy. Size is everything, in a freshwater tank anyway. There was no reason why they were letting Satan push them around. Maybe the extra fins scared them, or he was doing something painful to them that I hadn't noticed. It didn't really matter, but it was interesting. Strange stuff started happening in the tank. One morning I woke up and all of the gravel was piled up on one side of the tank. The glass bottom was exposed on the other. There was nothing in that tank that could do that. Being such a mystery, I assumed it was Satan. I figured it was just something that type of fish did. Another morning, all of the decorations were in different places and had tiny bite marks all over them. On at least 6 different occasions, out of the corner of my eye, the tank looked like it was filled with blood, but changed back to water once I looked straight at it. Things got worse. Every few days, one of Satan's tank mates would die. Fish die, no big deal. The weird thing was the corpses were flat. Not kind of flat. Paper thin. They reminded me of empty Capri Sun bags. It was like something was sucking out their insides, skeleton and all, leaving the skin. Even stranger, on the days I found a flat fish corpse, Satan was noticeably bigger. The amount of growth seemed to increase with every flat corpse. I was starting to worry the tank is too small for him. That's when I noticed something that was really weird. Just too convenient. On either side of his head were tiny black spikes that got longer and thicker every day. He was growing horns. Fish come in all shapes and sizes, but given his name, this felt too perfect to be a coincidence. Eventually, all of Satan's tank mates were dead. I didn't replace them for obvious reasons. There was an upside after that. I knew for sure that everything that happened in the tank was caused by Satan. He uses his new horns to scrape little 6s in the algae on the glass. Never 3 of them together, though. It was kind of disappointing. He also digs pentagrams in the gravel. Not often, but I have seen it. I took the tank decorations out. He damaged them so severely they became eyesores. Not to mention, he had given them long, sharp points that I worried he would impale himself on. He was too big to have anything but him in the tank anyway. The voices started after taking the decorations out. I heard them in every room but the one the fish tank was in. They are deeper than I've ever heard a human voice go, and they never stop. It sounds like a church full of people with unnaturally deep voices praying softly in the next room. It's really faint, so it's not a huge deal, but Every once in a while, there's a loud, blood-curdling scream that I could do without. Naturally, I couldn't sleep. When I did, I had the most horrifying dreams you can imagine. They were about things like murdering my family, being a mass shooter, being in hell, which may not have been a dream, and countless other scenarios that ate away at my sanity. The other day I was scrubbing the algae on the glass and the water suddenly got so hot that it burned me. Satan was fine. Finally this morning I woke up and impossibly, there was another little fish in the tank. It was a little Satan. I named him Satanito. I have no idea how it happened. There were no other fish in the tank to breed with, but there he was, the spawn of Satan. If anyone out there has any guesses about what type of fish Satan is, or has had a fish like this and can offer advice, please don't hesitate to leave a comment. Oh God, I just heard glass shatter in Satan's room. A while ago, I was looking for a new game to play. I was a bit bored of the new Battlefield and Call of Duty. I like almost all types of games, from shooter games to puzzle games to horror games. I was looking on the internet for new game releases or other fun games to play when I stumbled on a game called Obscure. I went to their site and saw that their new game just released. The game was based on Silent Hill, Layers of Fear, and those type of games. Me still being salty that Silent Hill PT was cancelled, I thought I'd give it a go. The game was from a small developer, and it was only $15, so why not? The game was about a man who got into a car crash and somehow entered a separate, gritty reality. In the opening cutscene, he was driving home from a long day of work when he got a text from his wife telling him to stay safe on the road. When he looked back onto the road, a deer jumped in front of his car, which caused him to swerve off the road and crash into a ditch. Anyhow, I played the game for like an hour or so. Eventually I had to go into a building, but every single time I went through a certain door, the game would freeze and it would crash. I tried it a couple times, but it was always the same door that made my game crash. I went back to the game's website and looked through the forums, and I noticed other people had the same problem. I also noticed multiple people saying they experienced nightmares from the game and trouble sleeping. I thought, it can't be that scary. So I just jokingly brushed it off. Then I saw a comment about someone taking his own life because he couldn't take the nightmare anymore. I thought it was some kind of sick marketing stunt, so I once again didn't think anything of it. Eventually I found a fix. Someone said to put the game into windowed mode, enter the door, and then put it back into full screen or whatever. That worked for me. I played for another 30-ish minutes. Eventually a jump scare happened with a face appearing in the mirror behind the character, which really scared me. I then decided it was enough for that night because it was getting late. That evening is when the trouble already started. I indeed had some trouble sleeping. I never had any trouble sleeping, so it was kinda strange to me. I kept waking up in the middle of the night, like every hour or so. This went on for a couple nights, but it kept getting worse and worse. I started to have very realistic nightmares. Those kind of nightmares where you'd wake up the next morning and would be relieved it was just a dream. My nightmares all revolved around me being in a bad situation. In one dream I got kidnapped. In one dream I got glass stuck in my wrist. And in another dream I also got sent to a separate reality, and so on. Every morning I'd be relieved it was just a dream again. My girlfriend, who always sleeps next to me, jokingly said, "Whispering obscure in my ear in the middle of the night really isn't going to turn me on." This really frightened me because I never told her about the game, but also, I was apparently whispering the game's name in my sleep as well. That same night, me and my girlfriend were watching a show. She paused so she could get a snack, and I could go brush my teeth. When I was in the bathroom getting ready to brush my teeth, I looked at my own face in the mirror and I just zoned out. I felt like I was being watched. But I was just too deep into my own thoughts to move. After what felt like 2 minutes, my girlfriend came in to ask if I was okay. She said I was gone for like an hour. She thought I decided to go to bed, and she didn't want to wake me up, hence her not coming up to check on me sooner. I told her I was fine and I decided to go to bed that night, and once again, I had a very realistic nightmare. I remembered the comments on that thread, but I still didn't believe it. It just couldn't be. I decided to delete the game from my PC, which I haven't played since the first time after that one mirror jump scare because I didn't have time. When I tried to delete the game, it said the game wasn't on my PC anymore, even though I saw it sitting in my files right there. No matter what I did, I got a message along the lines of, couldn't find obscure.exe, or can't find obscure.exe, UNINS. I did launch the game, and it launched just fine. Eventually I decided to factory reset my PC and thankfully the game was gone. After that, I was slowly able to sleep normally again, but I still had so many questions. Did all those people really have those nightmares just because of this game? Was there something evil attached to this game, and was it trying to make its way into my life? I tried to go back to the game's website, but I couldn't find it anywhere anymore. I really don't believe in any paranormal stuff, so I still brush it off as one huge coincidence, but it's still not sitting right with me. But one thing I know for sure is that if I ever stumble upon that game again, I'm staying away from it. I recently moved into a new apartment with my dog, Marbles. It's not a nice place by any means, but it's the only option I had. I'm just starting a new job and I barely have enough money to cover rent, ramen, dog food, and a Netflix subscription. So I settled on this small dirt cheap apartment on the outskirts of town, partly because it's cheap and partly because it's pet friendly. No, it isn't ideal, but it's only temporary while I save up some cash. The apartment is small, with only 3 rooms. The first room you enter is the kitchen/living room, with a hallway in the back. The door at the end of the hall leads to the bathroom. In the hallway is a door on the right side to the bathroom. I don't have any furnishings or personal belongings, so the apartment remained very bare. I never bothered to worry about sprucing the place up because it was just a temporary home. We had been in the apartment for a few weeks and everything had been fine. As we really settled into the place, Marbles took a liking to the couch in the living room. It wasn't my couch. It came with the apartment. Well, Marbles started sleeping on the couch at night. That said, Marbles likes to get up and relocate in the middle of the night. She would get up and come to the bedroom door and hope to get inside. I always sleep with the door closed, so she would start to whine and paw at the door. Marbles had long nails that she hated getting cut, so you could hear her walking throughout the apartment if you were awake, and it made her pawing pretty loud. After a few nights of this, I just started leaving the door open for her. From then on, she would come and get in the bed with me at all times of the night. This never bothered me. Many more weeks went by, with nothing noteworthy happening. Well, one weekend my Netflix binging session lasted much longer than usual, and I was still up at 2 in the morning. I was just wrapping up Stranger Things Season 2 when out of the corner of my eye I saw it. In the doorway to the hall, there was something peeking at me. I turned to look directly at it. It looked like the top half of a face, peeking from the left side of the doorway. The only thing I could see were 2 eyes, beady and black, staring at me. I was frozen, not sure if it was fear or shock stopping me from moving. I blinked. It was still there. After a few more seconds, I started panicking and yelling out, "Who are you? Get out!" For a few seconds it kept staring and then slowly began to pull away and out of view. Once I could no longer see it, it took a few moments to regain control of my body. Once I had, I jumped up and slammed the door, locking it. Marbles, who had been laying on the bed with me, was now sitting up and alert. I called the police and told them someone had broken into my apartment. After a while, I heard them knocking on the front door. Eventually, I mustered the courage to step out from the room and run to the front door. They investigated and the landlord was called. No one was found in the apartment. And when the police had arrived, the front door was still locked from when I got home. There were no signs of breaking and entering, but I insisted that I saw someone. The police did one more sweep of the apartment before leaving, telling me that there was nothing more they could do. The landlord, to whom I must give credit, swapped out the locks the next day, giving me all new keys. He told me that it was possible a previous tenant still had a set of keys to the room and had come in. The thought unnerved me, but the more I thought back on it, the less human the thing seemed to be. It took a few weeks and many sleepless nights to go back to normal, if you could call it that. I told myself that I could handle the stress, that we would only be here a little while longer. During that time, I also bought a baseball bat, which I now kept beside my bed. Now, I still kept the door to the bedroom open at night, but only slightly ajar so Marbles could slip in or out. I didn't feel comfortable seeing the doorway where that thing had been. One night, Marbles came in and hopped up on the bed like she usually does. She settled down and rested her head on my thigh, a common occurrence. I had been asleep and never bothered to open my eyes. I started drifting back off to sleep when I heard a sound. It was a familiar sound of scratching on the floor. It was Marbles' nails on the floor as she walked. It came from the living room and was approaching the bedroom door. I was facing the side of the room with the door, and I opened my eyes. Marbles was there, pushing the door open and coming in. A chill ran up my spine. Slowly I looked over and down at the bed. It was there. The thing was resting its head on my thigh, looking right into my eyes. For a second I got a look at it. It had a humanoid form, but it was impossibly inhuman. Its face was horrific, with those beady black eyes, long greasy black hair, and a mouth without lips. Its body was elongated, and it looked as though it was made up of only bones with skin wrapped tightly around them. Its face started to creep closer to mine, and I was finally able to move. I threw the blanket over the thing and jumped out of the bed, running to the front door. I could hear it scurrying behind me, along with Marbles running behind. When I got to the door, I turned to see both Marbles and the thing following. Marbles made it to the door first, and once she was out, I slammed the door closed. I heard and felt the thing slam against the door, scratching and banging against it. I could also hear its raspy breathing. Eventually, it all went quiet. My phone was still inside, but after a while, one of the neighbors opened the door after frantic knocking. They phoned the police for me. The police weren't as friendly this time, but I told them I trapped the person inside my apartment. After a long search of the entire apartment, the police found nothing. I couldn't believe it. They scolded me and told me that if I called for this again, I'd be arrested. I felt like I was going insane. Refusing to go back in alone, the landlord accompanied me while I packed up all my belongings. I wasn't staying here any longer. My parents had an extra room they offered me, and it was going to take a long time before I felt comfortable being alone again. I'm typing all this out from my parents' house, laying in the guest room. Well, a few paragraphs ago, I noticed something. Over in the corner is a closet with folding doors. It's slightly open, and in the crack of the doors I can see two beady black eyes staring right at me. I was always alone. My parents kicked me out as soon as I turned 18. The rest of my family lived across the world. I didn't have many friends. Long story short, I wasn't loved. Most of my time I spent aimlessly wandering around my town, hoping that somebody would come for me. It never happened. There was this house, though, that I always felt drawn to. It was abandoned, looked like it had been for quite some time. Vines were crawling across the exterior, the windows were boarded up, and the paint was chipping away. I never explored it, mainly because it didn't look safe. But as I walked by it one very late night, I realized even if it was unsafe, and I died in it, nobody would care. They wouldn't even go looking for me. Hey, what the hell? I muttered to myself. I might as well. As I approached the front door, it creaked open by itself. The inside was musty and covered in dust, but not nearly as broken down as it was on the outside. I was just about to enter when I heard something strange. A piano playing, and right by the piano, a strange shadow getting larger and larger as it slithered towards me. I stepped back in shock. It was some thing. It had tentacles in place of arms, and its smile was sharp and yellow, unnaturally large. Its eyes resembled a snake's more than it did a human's. It held out a tentacle towards me. Come, stay. You'll love it here. Its cold tentacle wrapped around my arm and pulled me into the house, where the door slammed behind me. It dragged me towards a table where dozens of other creatures sat. Something with nothing but a gaping black hole for a mouth and eyes drooled beside me. A monster with pale skin and no pupils grinned at me. An octopus-looking creature in a droopy chef's hat walked towards the table, a grand plate of disgusting-looking entrees in his tentacles. Dig in, the tentacle creature said, that same wide grin staring at me. Who are you? I asked. The tentacle creature laughed. Oh, foolish one, look at us. We were just like you once. Outcast, alone, nowhere to go until we found this house. Stay a while. You'll be like us in no time. It hissed. I will never be like you. I yelled and ran towards the door, but it didn't open no matter how hard I pushed. The creature with white eyes grabbed me and dragged me upstairs, into a room with a single, moldy-looking bed. Rest, young one. You have lots ahead of you. It smiled, and I could see the bugs in its teeth. Let me go home, please. It shook its head. You cannot leave. I cannot leave, even if I wanted to. This is your home now, as it is mine. I am not like you, I said, tears in my eyes. This is your home, not mine. The creature laughed a wheezy, throaty laugh. What makes you think I'm not like you, young one? I'm a human. You're just something, I said. It sighed. I was a human once. It reached into its dirty shirt pocket and pulled out a picture. It took me a while, but as I looked at it, the resemblance was there, and it became clearer to me that it was, in fact, that monster. This was me. I was alone, like you. I had nowhere to turn but this house. I hated it just like you, but as time went on, I found myself more at home. It changed me. You don't have to love it right away, young one, but trust me, this is where you are meant to be. Just give it a try, okay? He said and walked out. I sat on the disgusting bed processing everything. Just give it a try, okay? Slowly I lied on the bed and to my surprise, it was comfortable. To be fair, my bed at home was just an air mattress lying on my kitchen floor, but this was like nothing before. I fell asleep in an instant and I had a thought that maybe this wasn't going to be so bad after all. The next morning as I woke up, I looked different. Not too different, just enough for me to notice. My skin was paler and my arms were veinier. My hair looked more matted, and when I smiled to myself in the mirror, I couldn't help but notice it looked similar to the tentacle monsters. As time went on, I felt more and more like them. Things I used to be disgusted by became hobbies of mine, and things that I used to fear made me smile a wide smile like everybody else. I barely noticed any changes in me until about a week later. Were my teeth sharper, or was I just crazy? I just shook that thought off. But as time went on, the used to things I got. I felt at home finally. This was home, where I could find joy in tearing a live rat's head off and drinking its blood, or where I could eat live bugs whenever I so desired. This was meant to be. I was turning into the man I was supposed to be. The tentacle monster, who I now recognized as the most esteemed of gentlemen, smiled at me one day. Ah, brother, you've become one of us. A true monster. Monster? Who was he calling monster? I was no. I looked in the mirror and saw myself. My skin was now completely white. My fingers were long and sharp at the end. My eyes turned yellow like a cat's. My hair had fallen off. I was one of them. One day, as I was lounging by the piano, I heard the door creak open. A young man, maybe about my age, looked around. Hello? Hello? He called. I crawled towards him, eager to make a new friend. He jumped back at the sight of me. I flashed him my nicest, most gentleman-like smile. I reached out my hand to him. Come, stay. You'll love it here. Since I was 10 years old, I've been tormented by nightmares. My parents would hear me moaning and sometimes screaming in my sleep almost every night. Every few nights, the same dream would appear in my mind. I'm standing in front of a statue of an insanely beautiful woman, and suddenly the statue starts decomposing like a dead human body, but it happens in seconds. About a year ago, when I was 14, my mother, a very superstitious person, decided to buy a dream catcher for me. It was a cheap souvenir with plastic beads and black feathers, and she placed it in my room, next to the window. For a few nights, no screams nor moans had been heard from my room, and after this time the statue appeared again. This time it didn't decompose. It turned into a real woman with a body made out of stone, smiled at me and said, "I will protect you from what comes next." Despite this ominous prophecy, nothing else happens in this dream, and I woke up happy. Both my parents praised the dream catcher, and I was able to continue living, this time without fear. The statue lady would still appear in my dreams from time to time. She would warn me, give me strange advices, and often try to ensure me that she was on my side. It was weird, but way better than having non-stop nightmares. Then one day the nightmares came back. I found myself surrounded by fire that was getting closer and closer. Suddenly the statue lady came from the sky and took me out of there, saving my life. "I promised," she said, disappearing into the mist. The alarm went off about a second later, informing me that it was time to go to school. From this moment on, I've had the strangest nightmares every night, and the statue lady would always appear to save me from any horrors I was about to endure. With each next dream, she would get more and more colors, slowly turning into a real human body instead of stone. 4 days ago, her change has been completed. She saved me from a psychotic murderer with a chainsaw, and she asked me to call her Mother. I did that, and she kissed my forehead. While she was leaning towards my head, I suddenly felt a rotten odor coming from her mouth. The person who leaned back was not my statue lady. It was her heavily decomposed corpse, the one I had been seeing in my older nightmares. "No one will take your sanity from me," she said. "You are mine to torment forever." I woke up screaming, and I saw a ghost or a somehow visible energy wave escaping my bed and flying to the window. It crashed the black dream catcher in half and got out, leaving me scared and crying. My mother's gift had been bringing nightmares upon me, and my old nightmare had felt threatened. Therefore it crushed the catcher. Now I am alone against the statue lady again, and since that night I haven't fallen asleep. I feel as if I was slowly losing my mind, and I know that I'll eventually have to get some rest, hopefully before losing my mind, and when I fall asleep, the statue lady will put her rotten hands on me again.